My first reading of Stanislav Lem was confusing. I'd been disappointed an author with such critical acclaim hadn't dazzled me with the 4 short stories I read. I felt at times they were unnecessarily meandering and not particularly compelling. I asked for your help to understand if I was dumb and missing something, or if the stories I'd read really were just not that good. Turns out, both things were true. The short stories weren't representative of Lem's best work. Recommendations came in to read other, more substantial work, one being Solaris. And oh boy, did I eat that shit up. It's almost like Lem specifically listened to my personal gripes about his stories, then wrote this to appease me. And now, yeah, I recognize I was dumb for not having read Lem's top stuff sooner. Granted, I'd not heard of him until a couple of months ago, so I'm going pretty easy on myself. Straight up, this is a good book. Not good for its time, not important, not influential, could be all of those things, but in the end, it's just good. You know how Star Wars is fantasy, but in space? Or Dune is medieval politics, but in space? Well, Solaris is basically psychology, but in space. In a nutshell, my take is it's a cautionary tale about the hubris of man. This theme permeates the story at all levels, but the most interesting example is in how the only romantic relationship unfolds. If you haven't read it, you should. If you have read it, or are someone who rewatches comfort shows because knowing the ending is soothing, then strap into your spaceship. It's a time where humans have long been space exploring and settling new worlds. We're thrust into the confined space of an atmospheric entry craft, with the POV of Kris Kelvin, a psychologist who became obsessed with the planet Solaris to distract himself after his wife took her own life when she was just 19. He's assigned a mission on Solaris, a planet that's stumped scientists for over a century. You see, Solaris orbits 2 suns, one red, one blue. Before it was discovered, the pervasive theory was that changes in gravitational pull on planets revolving around 2 suns meant life was impossible. That was until Solaris. Its orbit path's unexpectedly stable, which by all calculations should be impossible. So what's the deal? Turns out the planet's covered with this huge ocean that looks like molten metal, only it's not made of water. It's viscous, erratic, and most importantly, a sentient being. Or an amalgam of beings, we don't really know. What we believe is that Solaris' ocean is so intelligent it can stabilize the planet's orbit. We've set up a research station on Solaris, hovering just above the ocean's surface, and pretty much since we arrived, we've been trying to make contact with the ocean, trying to decipher its big brain, hence the need for psychologists. But trying is the operative word. The first attempts were made 78 years ago. As time's passed, fervor at potentially making contact with this hyper-intelligent organism waxed, waned, and is now just about dwindled to extinction. Our boy Kelvin, though, he's one of the last handful who's still beholden to Solaris' siren song, and the hope of making contact with this amorphous, gelatinous, sentient thing. So down Kelvin goes, from the spaceship Prometheus to the Solaris research station. He pops the hatch open and is greeted by no one. A bit miffed, he sets off, and he soon comes across one of his new crewmates, Snow. The interaction goes strangely. Snow seems scared. Snow tells Kelvin Gabarian, the leader, and one of the 3 remaining crew members, has just died, apparently by his own hand. Now that Kelvin's here, there's 3 of them again. The other crew member being a fellow called Sartorius. As Kelvin goes to settle in, Snow cryptically tells him to ignore any forms he sees that's not one of the 3 alive crew members. The book's just getting started, and yet, reading it, Lem's already created so much tension in the story. Questions spring forth like, what's Kelvin's history? What's he there for? Is the trip a one-way trip? What's going on with the crew? What are these mysterious forms? What happened to Gabarian? Why was Snow so shook? It's all great setup, and I was in hook, line, and sinker. And the plot thickens. The next sequence kind of reads like playing an RPG feels. Kelvin's room on the station is across from the deceased Gabarian's room. He decides to snoop. He's reading the dead man's notebook, which talks about unauthorized experiments they recently carried out. He finds a note eerily addressed to him, referring to a journal and a book that he's got to go on missions to find. He also finds a tape recording with logs from Gabarian. Chuffed with himself, he walks out of the room only to come face to face with a black woman walking towards Gabarian's room. There's only men on the station. What the helly? He wonders if he's hallucinating. He goes to the library to find the books mentioned in Gabarian's note. Both have been checked out under Gabarian's name. He goes to speak with Sartorius, but the man is distracted, seemingly not alone in his laboratory, which he strains to keep closed off from someone within. He finally decides to check on the dead man himself and visits the freezer room where Gabarian's body is stored. Freaking jump scare. The black woman is there, laying apparently asleep with the dead man's body, unfrozen. Kelvin rushes back to his room and runs tests to ensure he's not gone crazy. Satisfied he has all his marbles, he goes to sleep. But when he awakens, he finds his wife next to him, which should be impossible considering, she's dead. Her name was Rheya, and she died after a fight with Kelvin. In anger, he said he was leaving her, which he didn't mean. And to really twist that knife, he'd packed his things and walked out. Before he left, she said, "I suppose you know what this means?" He did. He pretended he didn't. He thought she was too much of a coward to follow through, and he told her so. When he came home 5 days later, he found her body. She'd injected herself with some poison he'd kept laying about the place. For all these years, Kelvin's carried the guilt of killing her with him. So yeah, to see Rheya in bed next to him, alive, on Solaris, is a shock to say the least. Kelvin and this person who's apparently Rheya chit-chat. He asks where they are, and she says, at home, safe, happy. He pricks himself to make sure he's not dreaming. There's a few uncanny details Kelvin notices. Her skin is fresh and soft, just like a newborn baby's. She also casually mentions someone she couldn't possibly know of, who only came into Kelvin's life after her death. The dress she's wearing, while it looks like one Rheya had owned, it has no zipper or buttons. It can't be undone to put on or off. He knows it's not his wife. But through their conversation, he's convinced she really, truly believes she is. He decides to play along until he can think of a way out, which conveniently only takes a few hours. Kelvin convinces this imitation Rheya to get into a little space shuttle. He closes the door behind her and launches her into space to her doom. That's Kelvin 2, Rheya 0. Kelvin hunts down Snow and asks, "What the fuck?" Snow's like, so you've had a visitor already then, hey? Apparently each crewmate gets one. The going hypothesis is Solaris' living ocean probes their minds to create these beings, so they appear as a manifestation of their respective desires, conscious or unconscious. He says Kelvin should be so lucky the object of his obsession is his deceased wife and not something deeply repressed and never intended to be externalized. It seems Snow and Sartorius have far more triggering visitors. Snow lectures a little bit about repressed thoughts of man. We like to think of ourselves as paragons of virtue with honourable motivations for space colonialism. However, Solaris holds up a mirror to our deeper, darker side, and we hate being confronted with these parts of our psyche. More disturbingly, Snow says if a visitor is killed, a new copy will soon arrive. They've no idea how they get in, but a version of Rheya will return. Snow tells Kelvin he has one of the books referenced by Gabarian, and remember those unauthorised experiments Kelvin read about in the Dead Man's Notebook earlier? Yeah. Snow explains the visitors first appeared a little over a week after those were carried out. These were X-ray experiments that seem to have caught the ocean's attention. Now, some way, somehow, it's probing the crew's mind. Snow doesn't believe this is for nefarious reasons. If the ocean wanted them dead, clearly it has the capability to kill them. They talk of strategies for escape, though Snow says it might be worthwhile staying, not to discover more things about the ocean, but instead about themselves. Kelvin's understandably rattled, but after digesting a bunch of info from Snow and the missing book, he stops being afraid and he starts to become curious. There's an unspoken rule that each crewmate leave the other alone to their own visitor, and the visitors aren't a threat if you play by their rules, like don't try to harm them or escape from them, which is lucky because they are strong. We're talking about just about ripping doors off hinges type shit. When Kelvin hears a knock at his door, he knows it's the new Rheya. She's wearing the exact same dress as last time, the first one still being draped over his chair. He lets her in. Kelvin's still super freaked out about her, emotionally, and when she says something just like the OG Rheya, like, "I love you," he's triggered. He decides to run tests on the new Rheya. From a blood sample, he learns if he destroys some of her blood cells, they regenerate. He looks deeper, while everything looks perfectly normal at a cellular level. Once he goes subatomic, it's clear there's fundamental differences. Her matter is constructed at a far smaller scale, and he concludes these visitors are essentially superior human reproductions. After a few days, the three crewmates decide to convene via video conference. That way each can avoid having the others interact with their visitor. Snow and Sartorius want to destroy the visitors. They deduce the visitors may be comprised of neutrino structures, and a magnetic field might disrupt their fundamental makeup so they can't regenerate. They'll need to find a way to do this or think of another way to rid themselves of these psychological manifestations. They agree to try a similar approach to the unauthorized X-ray experiment that triggered the arrival of the visitors in the first place. But this time, they want to beam down a scan of Kelvin's brain to try communicate that the ocean should stop its shenanigans. Rheya eavesdrops on the conference call. She's distraught at the thought Kelvin doesn't want her. Witnessing her very sincere distress shifts something in him. He calms her. She confesses she feels she has thoughts that originate from far away, not from herself. It confuses her, but she knows she loves Kelvin, and that feels so real. Kelvin's moved. If she loves him like the OG Rheya loved him, if she believes she is who she is, then why not? Why shouldn't he have the second chance he never thought possible? So, pussy whipped anew, he becomes determined to save his new wife. It's hard not to wonder how much guilt plays a role here, and he's now in a game of cat and mouse with his other crewmates. They want to destroy what he now wants to save, a vibe Snow and Sartorius come to pick up on. For his part, Snow takes pity on Kelvin, but says one thing's clear: there's no place for romance on a remote space research station. It takes weeks for Snow and Sartorius to set up what's required to execute their plan. There's no reaction from the ocean at their first attempt, so they keep going, bombarding it with Kelvin's downloaded brain for weeks more. Still nothing. They eventually call it. They stop trying. Then finally, 15 days after the final experiment attempt, they witness this super weird disturbance in the ocean. It flares up and then gradually returns to normal. While all this is happening, Kelvin and Rheya have their own shit going on. Kelvin's love for Rheya is deepening, while at the same time he senses changes in her and a growing distance between them. Ever since Kelvin's video conference with Snow and Sartorius, this Rheya had started to realise she's not the real Rheya. Her fears are confirmed when finding and listening to the tape that Kelvin pilfered from Gilbarian, the dead man's room. She tries to end her life by ingesting liquid oxygen, but her supercharged body betrays her intention and she regenerates and recovers pretty quick. Kelvin asks why. Why did she make the attempt? Rheya confesses she knows she's not the OG. She believes she and the other visitors were created to study human reactions. She doesn't think she's being controlled though. If she were, then surely she'd be aware of it and know her existence is fake. But how she feels is so real. And because she knows she's not real, she wants to die. Kelvin says he doesn't care about that. He loves her. Just her being there cancels out the 12 years that went into his studies of Solaris. He wants to keep her. He doesn't know if she was sent to torment him, please him, be a token of friendship or a joke. He doesn't care. It doesn't matter to him now. Rheya asks if she really looks like the OG. Kelvin says, at first, for sure, but now, all I see is you. One night, about 5 weeks after the super weird disturbance of the ocean, Rheya's acting uncharacteristically shady, sneaking out of their room, which is strange because usually the visitors experience extreme agony when apart from their manifester. She's also super cagey when Kelvin asks her about it. The next night, before bed, she drugs him. When Kelvin awakens from his drunken stupor, she's not there. He goes crazy. Finally, Snow comes to check in. He's looking healthier and less tortured than he's ever been since Kelvin's arrival. Unbeknownst to Kelvin, Snow and Sartorius had created a disintegrator based on the hypothesis they'd had about magnetic fields disrupting the visitors' subatomic makeup. This ends them. And, Snow explains, since that super weird ocean disturbance, the visitors haven't returned once dispatched of. Rheya had given Snow a note to pass to Kelvin. He must hear Snow out. She didn't want Kelvin to harm himself, but she wanted release. She was gone. Snow and Kelvin discuss whether the visitors were intended as torture or presents. It's all a matter of perception. Snow thinks it's been, finally after, 78 years, an attempt at contact by the ocean, and it didn't understand what it was doing was harmful to them. Snow's fascinated with the whole experience. Now he's no longer tormented by his visitor, and he wants to stay at the station. He's sending a report to Earth, but it'll be months until they receive a response. All they can do is sit tight and reflect. After wallowing in grief from losing his wife again, Kelvin decides to go visit Solaris' surface, something he's not done yet despite having been on the planet for months at this stage. He interacts with the ocean directly and feels at peace with it. He makes up his mind. He'll stay. He dreams of seeing Rheya again. As I said at the start, this is a good book. Thrust into a sci-fi mystery, psychological romance and drama unfolds through engaging and artful storytelling. The content is super rich and there's plenty of Solaris lore to chew on that I simply didn't have time to deep dive into. For example, the whole reason humans are on Solaris is to make contact, but it's clear our understanding of what this might mean to an organism like the ocean is near unfathomable. Our attempts are based on what humans believe contact should be, not trying to meet with what Solaris is. In my mind, when Solaris tries to engage at our level by connecting with our minds, we literally kill the line of communication because it's uncomfortable. Hubris in the expectation that contact would be, should be, more palatable to our senses. This theme is paralleled in Kelvin and Rheya. Their story is told in the first person, from Kelvin's perspective. We only ever hear of his point of view, and still you can see the consequences of unhealthy and self-serving behaviours. Hubris, dressed up as love. Let's run through some key points for why. It's not Rheya who appears, it's a manifestation of of Kelvin's perception of her, a projection of the real deal who's been filtered through his idealized memories. Rheya has no agency. She's forced to love Kelvin both because that's how he remembers her and because the ocean has hardwired physical pain into being separated from him. She has no choice but to love him. Kelvin's selfish and possessive. He talks about wanting to keep Rheya like a pet. When you mix in guilt and love for the OG Rheya, it's a lot of hard emotions for a guy to process, particularly when it doesn't even seem he's cognizant of this. As Rheya starts to have her own experience and create her own memories, she grows to hate her existence. She doesn't want it. He ignores what she wants and tries to keep her around because that's what he wants. In the end, Kelvin falls in love with his own 3D printed fantasy. And yet while he was content in the illusion, the more Rheya learned of it, the harder it became for her to bear an inauthentic existence, until finally she broke up with him in the only way she could. The sad part isn't that Kelvin loses Rheya twice. It's that he never truly knew either version of her. He didn't understand the woman he married, and he didn't understand the woman Solaris created, and he didn't try learn. In the end, he's still waiting for a version of her that exists only in his own mind. It's a timeless tragedy. It's beautiful, and I'm so very happy to now be a Stanislav Lem fan. In case you missed it, I'll link the video to my first very confused encounter with him next. And that's all from me. Thank you.